Hello. In this video we're going to start something a little bit different, a little series. We'll deal with the software Scratch. So this is its home page. We have a choice. We can work online in the software online, or I also have the offline version on my computer. So this is what we're going to aim for in this video. Let's just have a look. Now, in my experiments, I noticed that in the video, I get some jumpy playback on the graphics, and that's strictly happening in the video. It's not happening on the display for the playback of the game. So this is kind of what we're going for, sort of in the area of an Asteroids kind of knockoff. And we'll see rocks go right through me. I don't have a character that can die yet. I have, so he can do a rocket blast and shoot missiles at the rocks, and the rocks break up. So something along this line is what we're going to aim for. This will be very similar to other YouTube videos. The one that I've been following along with is Patch, who has a lot of really great Scratch videos. So he has a project that's very similar to this, blasting lemons, and yeah, so I worked off of that quite a bit here, and we'll just do a video with my version of things. So maybe I will work in Scratch online, and I'll see if I can figure out how to share. Generally, I don't do that a lot, so yeah, we'll just have to see what we get here. So let's see, I think we go to create, and that will get me started. And yeah, we have a share button. I've never really worked online though. So the online version looks pretty much identical to the offline version, except offline has no share. So we'll call this RockBlasterDemo. And yeah, we'll see if I can share. My handle here is Scratch52, and 2 is spelt with 2 O's. So the least commonly used form of the word two, which means also. So yeah, this is the software. It's geared more for younger users. It was actually my daughter who pointed it out in my software manager when we were looking into some animation kind of stuff. So we have our coding options, which is blocks of code that we can put together to write scripts or code. We have animation frames, so it starts off with the Scratch Cat by default, and it has a very basic 2-frame type of walk animation. Assets for sprites are down here, and then assets for backdrops are down here. So we'll get rid of the Scratch Cat, and let's see. I guess we can do the backdrop. Yeah, we'll do the backdrop to start. So we'll just do something simple with the backdrop. We have our draw tools here, colors, and just some basic options. So we'll get rid of the outline. We don't need that on the backdrop. And let's just go with mostly blue kind of color. Just something to give an outer spacey look. So we can draw a rectangle. That's pretty bright, so let's darken that up some, maybe down there. Sort of like night sky kind of deal. I don't think that pitch black looks all that great. So what we'll do in this video is we'll aim to get a ship going. So we'll start off making a sprite. Let's call it ship. And let's expand this into full screen. See how that works out. Area's a little bit smaller working online than working offline. So we'll just deal with that. We can zoom with control and the scroll wheel. There's also the magnifying glass tools. And then this tool, we'll set it back to its default. And that tool can be very handy because sometimes we move things using the arrow key. Our zoom will change the amount that something moves. So if we're zoomed back here, we can move a control point quicker, but if we're zoomed in a bunch, it will move slower. So let's start off with just a basic ship kind of shape. So let's give it, we'll try 2 for an outline, and let's desaturate, and we'll go with somewhat of a gray to give it a little bit of pop on the screen. And then we can start off with a gradient over here. So we'll saturate this. Let's go with more or less the same kind of colors. Let's start with this side though. So we'll bring up the saturation and brightness. Pick something somewhere around there. And then here we can desaturate a bit. And maybe reduce the darkness a bit. So there's different things that a gradient can do. We'll look at manipulating that a little bit. So we have the rectangle and circle tools. When we hold down the shift key, the rectangle will make a square. And if we want a perfect circle, we would do the same thing. We would hold down the shift key. Now, if we look at what happens here, we'll just look at the way that gradients work a little bit to get an idea for how to manipulate some colors a bit. So we start off here and our gradient is very centered. So there's different ways that we can go about things. Now, I'm going to make a triangle, so I'm going to take my circle, hold down the shift key, which will give me snapping to 45 and 90 degrees. If I go into the reshape, we get control handles, as in path control handles. And if we look at this, these have Bezier curve handles, so we can create rounded curves with them. So this is more or less a type of path. And let's just undo that. So that gives an idea for how the drawing works here. I think that's called vector graphics. So let's just grab up one of the control handles, and we can move that with the arrow key. So depending on how we zoom, how quickly it will move will change. So if we go into a default zoom, how much it moves per mouse click, or per arrow key I should say, is going to vary it. We can also see what's going on with our gradient. The gradient has stayed centered where it was, so this is not stretching the gradient out with it. Now I'd imagine that if we change this at this point, I'm not really sure what's going to happen here, but our gradient has recentered. So that is something to understand about the gradient and a way to manipulate it. So there's the gradient as it starts and then as it ends up after manipulating. So if we wanted this centered on a certain point, that would be how we do it. It would depend on when we add the gradient in to get it to move to different parts of the shape that we're creating. So we want to turn this into a triangle, so we can grab this one up and delete it. And we can see the result on the gradient, and that may not have been quite what I was looking for. Or it may be exactly what I was looking for. Well, honestly, it's not quite what I was looking for, but it gives an idea for how the gradient actually works, which is kind of the point of the little exercise there. So we don't want to spend too much time on the ship and the artwork for it. So let's say we wanted something around that shape. That is not a good center for the ship. We'll recenter it later, and we'll look at making a measuring line. The size is also enormous. So this is a great big huge graphic. We can shrink this down as we're working here. So one thing that might be desirable to do is, if we are working on a project like this and we want to use consistent colors, it might be a good idea to take and create some color swatches. So we might want to make some color swatches. Now, that had an unfortunate effect, and that's something that I don't like with the software, is that it's changing this color. When I turn it off, it defaults to a particular color. So picking our colors might be something we want to do immediately rather than later. Let's turn that off and leave this blue for now though, and make a second color, and then we can manipulate the color as we want it. So maybe we want something like that. So if those are the colors that I want to be involved in my gradient, and we can see that I've reset the gradient on this and now it's changed its location. So now we have a gradient again, except it's not quite in the location that I wanted it. So yeah, that gives us the option to be able to color pick to restore into the colors that we had originally. So this gives us a way to be able to keep our colors handy and be able to reselect them. So let's go back on this and we'll get rid of that and we'll redraw. So we're going to redraw with the gradient. So we'll start with the square again. Now that we have an idea for how the gradient functions. And generally what a gradient is used for is to give us our shape. So knowing how to manipulate it is kind of knowing how to manipulate the appearance of the different shape that we may come up with here. So let's say that I wanted the gradient to more or less center on where the cockpit is, and I have an idea where I want the cockpit to be, and that gives the appearance of a rounded surface to the top of the ship. we would use the fact that this gradient is now set right here to manipulate where it ends up ultimately in my triangle. So I might want to select these color things and move them back a little bit. And I may want to select this control point and move it forward a bit. And then take this control point and delete it. And that may be a little closer to where I wanted the gradient to be. Let's just pretend that it's not quite where I'd want it though. So we're going to slide back a little bit. Somewhere around there I think would be good. Then I'll delete. We'll call that good. And then these ones I might bring down a little bit. And up a little bit. And out a little bit. So something along those lines. And if I want to speed up how quickly they move, I can zoom back. And now they're moving by a larger space. So let's call that good. Now, in my graphic, I also put some curves on, and that's worth looking at, looking how to create some measuring tools. So let's create a measure tool. We'll just make a line. So again, if we use the shift key, we're going to snap to the 45 and 90 degree angles. If we pick that line up, it's easily centered. So that line is centered. We can pick up the ship. Now it is centered. Go into control points. Zoom in a little bit. And use the measuring line to draw in a central control point. If we arrow key that in, we get a little bit of shape. Let's say we wanted to do that on 2 sides, on 3 of the sides I should say. So we might rotate our control or our measurement line here. Might decide to center it back a little bit. Go back into reshape mode, draw in a control point using the measuring line, and using the measuring line, go back into a default, maybe zoom back a little bit so that it moves by greater increments. And that gives us some nice curves appearance. And we could do the same thing if we wanted to measure in some thrusters onto our shape here. Now right away we're going to default back to gradient. Now let's say we wanted to make a measure line from a rectangle, and having a gradient isn't going to work out for us. What we might do is use the select, grab the line that gives us the 1 pixel with a black outline, and then select the rectangle tool. Now we have no fill and the 1 pixel line. So now we're creating something that we can use as a measuring tool. So let's guess something around there. We'll center that. And then we can go back and reselect our gradient. So we have this color here and this color here. Now we're matching our ship. Maybe we want the top bottom gradient. So that gives us a way to fill in after the fact, but we didn't actually want to do that. What we wanted was a solid single pixel line like this, because this is a measuring tool. Oops, let's undo that, get the select tool. We'll move this, that's a little wide for where I'd want the thruster engines to end up. Now we can go back, click off of our square because we don't want to manipulate its color. Get our gradient, get our secondary color, get our primary color. Now we have our gradient back. And we can draw in something for, let's change that gradient, like we want it up down here, something like that. We can zoom in a little bit, determine where exactly we want that to be, use the measure line to line it up, shift or control C to copy, control V to paste, pick it up. We might notice that our outline color is wrong on this, so let's undo that paste, let's undo that, and let's look at our color here. We can use the picker. It'll be a little harder to get off of this edge, but we can. Things slow down. I notice a little bit of slowdown here, and I'd imagine that's working on the online version. Now, we might want to flip this the other way around. Let's see how that looks. Oh, that's not actually doing anything. Oh, there we go. So let's see. Yeah, I'm not entirely satisfied with the way that works, but we'll just move on. So we copy it, paste it. Let's move it up and line it up with this one. So we'll just use the arrow key here. We can zoom back to a default, zoom out a little bit, arrow key down to move it the bulk of the distance. Then zoom in to line it up with the measuring line. And that looks pretty much there. So that's nicely measured out. We might want to take this one, flip it, just to give it a little bit of appearance. Then from here, we'd probably want to do a little bit of an animation. So we'll delete the color swatches because we can actually copy them from this point. So if we need them again, we're very easily able to copy them. So to get that color profile back into here, we just have to select. So now we have that identical color profile. Let's draw one more thing for our ship. So we'll take and we'll make a cockpit. So something along that line. Now we can manipulate this a little bit if we want to change the gradient. I'm just going to change its shape a little bit. So I'll delete that control point. And I'm going to call that good. So we'll just pop that onto the center. Use an arrow key to get it to where we want it. Let's put this onto the center point, we'll select the whole ship and center the ship so that around the middle of the gradient is on the line, and that will make our ship rotate where we want it to. Before we do that, we might want to scale this down a little bit. So we might want it a little bit smaller, so we don't have to scale it as much here, but we will be scaling it in script as well. So we would recenter that, move it again on the line. So that gives us a little bit of a ship. We can take our measurement lines and delete those. Now from here, we can duplicate this. Let's zoom in a little bit. And we'll make an animation for its rocket thruster. So we'll grab this. We'll make a gradient. We'll go orange to yellow. We'll leave that and refine it once we have our sort of flame drawn. So let's get rid of the outline. We don't really want that. And let's look at our colors here. Might want to darken that up a little. And somewhere around there should work. So we'll go into the control points, take this one and delete it. And this one, we can move it out a little bit to give it a little bit more of a shape. Let's take and put this more or less in position. We'll leave it in the front layer for now. Let's copy, paste for a second version of that, and we'll just more or less line it up here. So we want to just line it up with this one. So right around there should be good. We'll zoom back to default, down arrow, move it into place-ish, zoom back in, and refine where that is at. And that's about right there, so we can move it backward, backward, backward until it pops behind the engine. Do the same with this one. Duplicate this frame, duplicate it a third time. On this frame, we'll go back into control points. So we'll take this one, let's zoom back into the default zoom. We'll go 1, 2. We'll grab this one. We'll go up 1, 2. And this one we'll do the opposite. So we'll grab this point, we'll go up 1, 2. This one will go down 1, 2. And that gives us a thruster animation. So we can give these some names. We have ship here. We can call this ship. We can give this names too. So thrust 1. We can copy this, Control C. I won't right click on that, but we can paste it, change that to 2. Paste, Control V, change that to frame number 3. And then when we cycle through the animation, we won't need to exclude them by name, because the only purpose of the animation is when we activate the thruster. So when we use the thrust button, it can just cycle through all 4 frames, and the one empty frame, we'll just give it a little bit of flicker. So that should work fine. So that would be pretty much everything for the ship. Um, but the last thing to do is to center it and find a scale that we want it at. So probably around 30%. Let's see how that sits on the screen. That's a little bit big still, but we'll just settle for it, the scale that people end up at. That's sort of why I demo the draw tools and how to build something simple and make our own simple animation. Because that way people can go, oh, well, I'm going to make it smaller. Yeah, if I wanted to make it smaller, what I would do is I would grab the animation frame that has no manipulation on the frame, on the flame. I would duplicate the flame, I should say. So I would copy it, paste it into this one, scale everything, delete these, remake these, just being able to copy the flame at a different size into here. Or we also have the scaling option here. Yeah, it's probably best to do a balance between the two, get this the right size and not have to overly scale everything and to mess around with scale so much, because that can turn into this being this scale, the rocket being another scale, the rock being another scale. So let's look at code. We'll do some code here. So we'll start off with events inside a backdrop. So we'll get the ball rolling in the backdrop. Now, I'm not sure, I don't think we'll need any variables to start off here. I'm pretty sure that we can just go right to broadcasting a signal. So generally this is where I'll start my code from, is the backdrop. So this would be where there's a start button or something like that. So probably the most practical place to start the program from. So let's make a new message and we'll just call it start. So from there, we would go into the ship when I receive start. So the ship needs a whack load of variables. For now, we'll start off with the simplest part. We'll get the forever loop and we'll go into motion, point towards mouse pointer. So now we have steering with one block of Scratch code blocking. So that's pretty simple stuff. Now, typical things, we want to make it go where it should be. The ship would likely start off hidden. Which that would likely be a when clicked scenario, because we can have this start in different places. So we can go like this, when it's clicked, hide, go to point in direction 90 as being the default. That would have it looking to the right of the screen. And we would also initialize our variables here. So what do we need for variables? We have it so it can point, and the next thing to do is to get it to thrust and to sort of fly around like it should. So we want that space kind of flight. So we'll go up into variables, my variable, we'll delete, or we can rename it as well. So we're going to need, for this sprite only, drag. So that would be our friction or drag. So we'll OK with that. We're going to need thrust. So that's the amount of force that comes out of the engine. And did we make that for this sprite only? Let's check and make sure. Okay, yeah, I did. So if you're not sure if you made it this sprite only and accidentally made it global, you can just click in the backdrop and see if the variable is there. If it's there, then I would have accidentally have made it global. So we have drag, thrust, for this sprite only, velocity for the x-axis. Okay. And we need velocity for the y-axis. So we'll just capitalize that. And I don't put spaces generally. You can do it in this software, but most generally it's not a good practice, because in most programming that space is not welcome. So you can put a space here, but the more proper thing to do is to either camel case it or give it an underscore, because in most programming that white space means it's the end of the name. So velocity would be its name, and then a space, and then X would be a mystery to most programming languages. Well, all programming languages that I'm aware of. So we won't show these, we don't really need to. If there's a problem, we could. So basically we want it to move only forward, and I've been using the space bar to shoot, so I'm going to make B for booster. So we'll make the B button the booster. So I guess we would go into our control loop. We'll need an if. If that could possibly be better off as an if else. We may refer back to my project if I'm having troubles with the math or something, or the scripting. That way we don't struggle through it and make the video too tedious. Let's get to setting or initializing our variables. So we need drag, so drag will set to 0.9 to start, and we'll change that later. Thrust, let's try a 0.5 and see how that goes. Velocity X and velocity Y will begin at 0. So this kind of a ship, it moves differently. You just want to apply force rather than start driving like a car or a character. So we'll look at how to do that. We'll need some operators. We'll need, let's see, a less than. We'll need an ABS, and we'll mention what that does. So let's see, we need sensing. So we're going to go if the B key is pressed, then we want to do some force. But we want to limit how much force can be being applied here. Let's see. I think we also need to add in a direction variable. No, actually, I don't think that we do. So what ABS does is ABS will turn a negative number into a positive number. So when we want to put a ceiling on how fast our vessel can go, it can either be going at a negative velocity or a positive velocity. So if we turn it into an ABS, we only have to check the positive direction. So we would be looking at if the ABS value of velocity x or y is less than, and let's cap at 10 for now. Oh, that's built wrong. We have to build this correctly. The ABS value of velocity x is less than 10. Now it will fit in there. It won't fit in there when we don't build it properly. Then we can add speed. Let's duplicate that. If the ABS value of velocity y is less than 10, then we can add speed. So let's stop that. Now up here, we want to change x by and change y by. The values we'll change them by is velocity x and velocity y. So now it comes to the calculation of changing velocity x and velocity y. So we'll go up here, velocity x, and we'll go up here, velocity y. Now let's see, what are we going to need? We're going to need some math. So we'll duplicate this. We need a sine to calculate x and a cosine to calculate y. Now let's see if I can remember how to do this by memory. I believe we need multiplied by. So we're going to go thrust multiplied by the cosine of direction oh, that was a boo-boo. We'll get rid of that. We'll duplicate this whole thing. And thrust multiplied by the sine of direction. And I'm pretty sure that that math is right. If we can do it without looking at my cheat notes, that would be best. Sine of direction. Yeah, let's peek. Let's peek at my math here. So we have it here. Thrust times sine of direction. So that was correct. That will save us embarrassing experimentations. So we'll just duplicate direction. So we use thrust here rather than speed because we want the thrust to add up into our velocities. So the most typical way to see this, and we'll see it with the asteroid, is change x by speed times the sine of direction rather than thrust, but we're doing this in an additive fashion. So it's going to act the way that we want it to act for a spaceship rather than as a car. So where we add it on is different. So we're using change in a different way. And I believe this is all correct now. So we have the math here and there, and that looks identical. So let's just run and see what we get here. Okay, we didn't get anything at all. And the reason we didn't get anything at all was we hid when clicked. That's making an assumption that it will have like a start button sooner or later. So we have to go up into looks and tell it to show. So we haven't told it to show itself. So that should get us going. That'll get us there. And the B key is giving us some thrust. Now what we don't have is any calculation adding in the drag. So he's just going to keep flying off into infinity. We don't want him flying off into infinity. So we need to add in some calculation for drag. Let's duplicate these. We'll stop. We have drag set to 0.9. So we'll need some operators. We're going to multiply. And these are actually wrong. This is the wrong thing. So let's pull these out. And we don't want that. We want to set. So we're going to set velocity x and velocity y to the value of velocity x or velocity y times drag. So we'll pull that over here. We'll put these into here, like so. Now our ship won't fly for eternity. Now he's got some drag. We'll press the B key and he'll slow down. And he slows down maybe a little too fast. So he kind of is driving sort of like a car. So generally in asteroids, the level of drag is set to very low. So if we set this to 1, what will happen is he has no drag at all. What happened there? He should not have drag at all. Oh yeah, that's right. So he's flying off into eternity and has become difficult to find again. So the closer to 1, the lesser the drag. So at 0.9 he had too much drag. Let's try 0.95. That should be close to something asteroids like. That's still a little bit too much drag for this particular game. So let's try 9.8. A lack of drag was one of the annoying things with Asteroids, the original version. So the fact that he would float around after you thrusted. Generally the rule for me when I used to play Asteroids as a child was when you have to use the thruster, you're screwed. So that was kind of my philosophy for Asteroids, and that should be about right for drag. So in the next video we'll come back and we'll get him shooting and maybe doing some animation. So how the animation would look is, that's pretty basic. We can actually add in the animation right now for this. So let's see. That's where we get into should have this been an if or an if else. So the bottom line is, yeah, it should have been an if else. So let's change it. We're going to go if the B key is pressed, the things to do if the B key is pressed. Among those things is going to be next costume. So if the key is pressed, we want to cycle through the animation. Otherwise, we want to switch the costume to ship. So now that actually introduces a problem in the script, and it makes it do something that isn't necessary. So generally I think that it's the best policy to not make it do things that are unnecessary. So let's get this here. We'll get another if statement. We'll get a comparator operator equals. And I believe that this should work here. So we'll go not. If the costume is not equal to ship, switch costume to ship. So we'll put this inside of an if. That way each loop it's not changing the costume. It's only changing the costume if it resulted as from being left in not the ship costume as the result of thrusting. So that should get us working, but we have to put the block back in for it to function. So now we have a little bit of animation to go with our movement. So that's it for this video. I guess that was a little bit lengthy. Let's stop that. Let's see what share looks like here. We'll just click it and see what happens. And see how that goes. Saving project. Congratulations on sharing. Your other people can now try it out, give comments, and remix it. So there you go. That's the first time I've ever done something like that, and in the next video I guess we'll come back and we'll look at what we can do to advance this to something that can shoot as well. And until then, take care.